very good afternoon to you. My name is Jaya Calder from Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and I'm going to be running this afternoon's webinar session on Project Salamander. Now, for an audience, although you're automatically muted and we don't see your cameras, we really want your engagement throughout this session. So what you do have is a chat box. Now, please make full use of that chat box, whether it be a question, an observation, or anything that you would like to even say to the speakers, and I'll make sure that they get that. The other thing is we are recording this afternoon's session, and everybody that's registered for our session will get a copy of the recording and a copy of the PDF of the slides. So let's get started, and I'll pass over to Paul O'Brien, my colleague. Paul.
Thanks, Jaya. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar looking at the floating wind project Salamander, which will be off of the east coast of Scotland. So you're going to be hearing from two presenters from the Simply Blue Energy Group, and this will be Adrian de Anders and Chris Vibert. So Adrian is going to be up first. So should be very interesting. This will be one of the largest floating wind projects in the world, so we're all dying to hear about it. Adrian, over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Paul. I'm very glad to be here in this Deep Wind seminar to be able to introduce the project Salamander to all the attendees. So just a very brief introduction. So as Paul mentioned, so it will be myself and my colleague Chris on this seminar, although my other colleagues are also on this seminar and will be able to come in for the Q&A session as well if required. So just to cover the agenda of this Deep Wind seminar, so I'm going to do first an introduction about the Salamander project, so just to describe what is Salamander, where are we, and why are we doing this. And then my colleague Chris is going to then go through an introduction to the foundation technology that we have pre-selected for the Salamander project, and then to explain our supply chain engagement so far, what we are planning for the next few months, and just to inform everyone so that everyone is up to speed about how to engage with us as well. Let's start with the introduction of Project Salamander. So what is Project Salamander? Project Salamander is a 200 megawatt pre-commercial stepping stone floating wind project in Scottish waters, and it's located 35 kilometers east of Peterhead. I'm sure you are all aware of the exciting ScotWind process that is underway at the moment, but just to be clear, this project is outside of this ScotWind process. The project is developed by Simply Blue Energy in partnership with Subsea 7 Group, and I will explain a little bit more about these two organizations in a bit. And the project objectives is they are really focused on basically achieving the targets set by both UK and Scottish governments. We have pre-selected a novel floating foundation technology that is especially targeted at maximizing the local content in Scotland and wider UK. We are actually currently exploring different routes to market for this project, and we have them on the list below. The first one is connecting to the grid and securing a CFD. The second one is connection to a large-scale private customer, and that can be offshore or onshore. Last but not least, hydrogen production, green hydrogen production, and that can be, again, offshore or onshore. So what is the vision behind Project Salamander? The vision behind Project Salamander is the fact that we want the project to be a catalyst for Scottish and wider UK's supply chain to enable the future floating offshore wind local content. Currently, we have a couple of projects in Scotland, which you may be aware of, Highlands Scotland and Kincardine, both 30 and 50 megawatts. And then we have a huge opportunity with ScotWind projects that will come later down the line. But currently, there's a gap between these floating projects that they are currently operational and the projects that will come in the future that will be on the gigawatt size. And we are defining our project Salamander as a stepping stone project. And a stepping stone project for us, it focuses on three main things. One, which is the reduction of risk on new technology, achieve cost reductions, and push the local supply chain forward so that the supply chain is ready for the future commercial opportunities. This type of stepping stone projects absolutely essential to quantify the risk for investment, but also to lower that risk, and basically so that the supply chain is ready for these commercial projects. It's also very important that basically we achieve these cost reductions so that in the 2030s we have floating wind projects which are competitive and commercial. We wanted to go back a little bit and think a little bit about the objectives from UK and Scottish government and how our project Salamander fits within this objective. So we've put together a summary on the left. So we have obviously the net zero targets from UK and Scotland, 2050 and 2045. And then we have one specific to floating wind development, which is at the moment 1 gigawatt by 2030. Then we also have some targets in terms of offshore wind development, 40 gigawatts by 2030 and 11 in Scotland by 2030. And we also have a clear desire for supply chain, local supply chain, both in UK and Scotland. So we have in Scotland, part of the ScotWind process, there's basically 25% commitment up to 10%, which was 4. And in general, we have the 60% of local supply chain content by 2030 target that was identified in the offshore wind sector deal. Specifically for Scotland, I chose this text from the offshore wind policy statement that says Scottish supply chain must be fully prepared with the capability and capacity required to deliver floating offshore wind projects at commercial scale. And that's effectively where we are focusing our efforts. So on the right, we have how we believe we fit within this objective. So we hopefully will be providing 20% of this UK floating wind target by 2030. We have selected a foundation which has high potential for Scottish content. We see ourselves as a pre-commercial opportunity for the supply chain to gear up. And last but not least, we are looking at decarbonization opportunities through alternative routes to market. In terms of our supply chain approach, what have we been doing? So as I mentioned earlier, the purpose of this stepping stone project is to act as a platform and catalyst for technology and supply chain development before these future fully commercial projects. And in order to achieve this full potential for local content for the future ScotWind projects, we must gear up now. It's important that basically the supply chain has a pipeline of projects. They make certain investments and certain commitments. And it's important that we have projects in the water pre-2030 so that we smooth that development curve. We are really committed to our supply chain goals, and we are doing a lot of work and putting things in place to help us succeed on this journey. And we're looking at 3 specific things. First one is the pre-selection of a technology that is well suited to a Scottish supply chain. The second one is extensive and early engagement with the supply chain, and my colleague Chris will be able to speak more about this in the next few slides. And then the early collaboration in the design process. We want to pioneer a new way of working with the supply chain, a collaborative way of working where the supply chain has input into the very early and this design process. The Salamander project is being developed in partnership between Simply Blue Energy and Subsea 7. Simply Blue Energy, we are a blue economy project developer, and we work in aquaculture, floating wind and wave energy projects in the different countries in the British Isles. We are architects of this stepping stone concept for floating wind, starting in Wales with the Blue Gem Wind joint venture between Simply Blue Energy and Total, developing 2 stepping stone projects, the Airbus and Valorous projects at 96 and 300 megawatts respectively. And we also have another project that we announced a few months ago, which is the Emerald project portfolio in Ireland, developed as a joint venture with Shell, with 2 phases, a 300 megawatt and 700 megawatt phase. We also have our partner Subsea 7. Subsea 7 is a global leader in the delivery of offshore projects, and it has an extensive track record of execution of projects in Scotland, specifically offshore wind projects like Beatrice and Seagreen bottom fixed offshore projects. We also have Exodus as a subsidiary of the Subsea 7 group. Exodus Group is one of the offshore energy leading consultancies providing providing technical, environmental, and commercial support to many different projects in the oil and gas and offshore wind industries. And Exodus Group has participated in many offshore wind projects in Scotland. I just wanted to touch on our leasing route and our routes to market. As I mentioned in the first slide, our project is outside of the current ScotWind leasing process. And if we look at the Sectoral Marine Plan for Offshore Wind Energy that was published towards the end of last year, there's a section on innovation and decarbonization projects. Specifically, it specifies that innovative projects may be up to 100 megawatts, and projects bigger than 100 megawatts will be related to the decarbonization of the oil and gas sector. We are currently planning for a leasing process later this year, but obviously this is subject to details to be announced by Marine Scotland and Crown Estate Scotland in due course. I also wanted to touch on very quickly on the alternative routes to market that we are looking at within this project. One of the exciting routes to markets that we are looking at is the production of hydrogen, and again that can be offshore or onshore, and that's really interesting because of where the site is located in terms of the region, and also the proximity of St. Fergus gas terminal. We are currently investigating different options within this green hydrogen route to market, as well as liaising with some potential off-takers. And I just wanted to also briefly touch on the timeline, because obviously this will be very useful for the supply chain. So we are expecting to be able to be in a position to secure an option agreement in Q1 next year. And then our next big milestone will be securing our consent, which we are currently planning for Q3 2024. If we decide to go for a connection to grid route to market, then we already have a grid offer. We would then be connecting to the grid in 2029. And we are looking, as I mentioned, to other routes to market. So there may be the chance of actually bringing this date forward. So we would be looking at the first power or first hydrogen at some point between 2027 and to 2029. And I think this is the last slide that I wanted to touch on, and I wanted to introduce you to my colleague Chris Viver now. He's the engineering manager for Salamander, and he will be discussing our pre-selection of our foundation technology, as well as our engagement with the supply chain, how the supply chain can get in touch with us. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks for the intro, Adrian. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming today. So yeah, as Adrian said, I'll talk you through our technology that we've pre-selected. I'll talk you through the process of how we undertook that pre-selection and what review we did. And then I will take you through our supply chain engagement to date and how we intend to continue with that engagement through the next phases of the project. As Adrian said, the stepping stone nature of the project, the supply chain engagement is really important to us so that we can maximize the benefit both to us and to you in the process. So firstly, we'll take a bit of a look through the industry in general and how it's developed to date and how it will continue to. We can see here a timeline for the technology development in industry, starting with those early prototypes of floating offshore wind, such as the Highwind demo or Windfloat Atlantic in Portugal. These projects were targeted solely at the technology demonstration aspect. So they were answering the question, can we install and operate a regular wind turbine on a floating foundation? And if you link those goals to what sort of technologies you deploy for those projects, we can see that you probably look for highly stable foundations that are designed to limit motions to give you the best chance of operation there. Next, we move on to the sort of multi-turbine demonstrator projects, of which we have two in Scotland. So we have Highwind Scotland and Kincardine, but also there's other projects such as the 4 projects in France. These projects were intended to further demonstrate the technology. They've utilized larger turbines, modern commercial turbines up to 10 megawatts, and put these on the floating foundations. Unlike the initial prototypes, these are intended to operate for sort of 20 to 25 years. And there's sort of other aims around the project related to more commercial aspects and contractual structures, project finance, and reducing the overall cost of energy. So here we could imagine the technologies deployed in these projects are likely to be sort of optimizations and developments of those initial prototype technologies. Then if I jump past our stepping stone projects and we go to sort of the commercial scale projects that we're likely to see out of ScotWind, These projects are a completely different beast. The aim of the projects is to make them commercial success through full life. And here we're talking about deployment on a sort of industrial scale. Unlike the prototypes, we have sort of 50 or more units potentially that we want to deploy. So you can imagine that technologies that you would design for 1 to 5 units might be quite different to what you would design for 50 plus units. So here we might see foundation concepts changing. Now, if we jump back to our stepping stone projects, like we said, the purpose of these projects is to act as a catalyst for those commercial projects. So we want them to mirror the commercial projects as much as possible, just on a slightly smaller scale so that we can get ready. So that's why we believe when we're looking at technologies for our project, we need to also look at what is suitable for the gigawatt scale, because if it's suitable for those, then we can help develop it at on our project level. So talking about what we see on the market now. So in the last few years, we've seen a big shift in the messaging from those demonstrators being installed and successfully producing power. Everyone's gearing up for the commercial projects. Foundation designers are changing their messaging around their industrial plans for gigawatt scale projects. And likewise, we see a number of new concepts coming onto the market that from the outset look to sort of attack those difficulties and concerns around the practicality of delivery. So the key themes around this industrialization is sort of ease of manufacturing and fabrication, and I guess the attempt to move towards a sort of more factory type fabrication approach. That's sort of a read across from the turbines themselves, which are deployed at large scale recently in offshore wind, and also sort of the practical implementations of projects. So the processes by which you assemble and install the turbines, you commission the units, and how you take them to their new home offshore. So a number of concepts have looked directly at those practicalities. All of this is built in the context that if you make things easier, then you're likely to reduce cost and you'll make this more competitive against the other forms of energy. So one of the areas particularly is around modularity of the foundation structure, sort of standardized components fabricated en masse and then assembled rapidly for turbine installation. So we believe some of these newer concepts, if they get the design right, they get the industrialization process right, they have the opportunity to become sort of the cornerstone of the future commercial projects. This isn't to write off any of the concepts on the market at the moment already developed, but it's more sort of a challenge to those concepts to sort of look at these new exciting ideas and sort of engage with them and try and respond to those new ideas. So you might think, why are we making a pre-selection of technology so early in our project, and why are we communicating it to the market? Well, the purpose we think we're doing, as Adrian says, we're looking to do things slightly differently to other projects. And the purpose of doing this is so that we can better communicate with the supply chain by having a sort of tangible design of foundation, which is a big part of our project, and realistic dimensions and realistic plans for processes that we can engage with you guys early in the process. We believe that we can have those discussions earlier and they'll be more positive. So as I said, we want to challenge the normal way things are done. So in this sort of selection process and review, the first thing we did was look at the UK market. We want to maximize the UK content, so we need to look at what we can deliver within the UK, and we want to choose a technology which is both sound technically and commercially competitive for us, but also most importantly, what concept will allow us the greatest opportunity to place as much content within the Scottish and UK supply chain. Therefore, in this high-level review, we undertook of Scottish and UK supply chain. We sort of came up with a few findings. One was the obvious, very strong capability around steel fabrication, coming from vast experience in sort of shipbuilding, oil and gas construction, and other offshore renewables activities. And then the other was more around our thoughts of, if you look to fabricate these things as a whole in one piece, the sort of requirement for space within that process is extremely large. These structures are quite big structures. So within the Scottish supply chain, the space requirement to do that at a sort of commercial scale would be a real challenge. So that's why we're hitting on this sort of need for high modularity within the design, so that you can fabricate across potentially several different facilities and you can assemble rapidly together. So these two high-level requirements sort of married with the timelines and the characteristics of our site, and those sort of things limit us more towards the sort of conventional semi-submersibles or barge-type concepts. So following this review, we engaged with a number of foundation concept designers. We undertook a preliminary technology review and qualification process, but the main criteria in that was how can we maximise the content for Scotland and the UK. So the conclusion of the process was recent announcement that we made with respect to one such technology provider with whom we're currently working with in more detail. So we're trying to understand the merits of their design and the ability for it to be deployed on the project. Osagy, you see here some of the news articles, they're one of the new breed of foundation technology concepts. We've signed an MOU with them as a designer, and we intend to take them through this sort of preliminary design study phase of our project to understand how it fits within our project goals and the benefits of the Scottish and UK supply chain. So Osagy themselves have been around for a few years, but only recently been announced publicly. The company was formed by the inventors of the principal power wind float technology, now forming their own company, Osagy. They've recently received significant financial backing from Moreld Ocean Winds, as well as sort of the venture arm of Chevron, as Chevron's sort of first dip into the floating wind market. Notably, as we've highlighted as a key requirement in our supply chain review, it's a highly modular design, and the assembly methods planned for sort of rapid assembly of components in the marshalling port. The low weight of the concept with respect to some others also gives us significant positives for commercial scale deployment due to the reduced material usage, and that's one of the key areas we'll look to review in our next stage of the project. The lightweight structure also means that it decreases the quayside draft requirement, meaning that we're able to access more port facilities within Scotland, both for assembly but also for operations and maintenance, where we need to bring these things home potentially. Overall, we see sort of three high-level advantages. This sort of 30% plus reduction in mass from the majority of market competitors, the ability to access what we believe sort of double the amount of port facilities within Scotland, and the sort of future clear process that we can see for this concept going to true commercial scale. So the processes that they're putting in place for the fabrication and deployment. As I said, it's an exciting new competitor in the market, and our preliminary agreement with them is to further understand how we can work together in the context of Salamander. So yeah, next section deals with our supply chain engagement, and why this is so important to us. So firstly, let's talk about why it's important to us. The project itself is at the moment at a very early stage of development. We are a long way from being able to place orders to the supply chain, but the ability to place those orders with the Scottish and UK supply chain is dependent on us building a project that is well suited for you to be able to deliver. We're trying to make the right decisions now that we end up with a successful outcome for both us and for Scotland in terms of jobs and revenue. Therefore, this early engagement is about us having the greatest possible information with respect to what can be delivered within the Scottish supply chain and how that is likely to progress in the intermediate time between now and when we want to deliver our project. We want to collaborate as partners with the supply chain, and this is the approach that Adrian was talking about, trying to try something different. We want to make use of the extensive experience in delivery that the supply chain has, and we want you to have a platform to influence the design process and how we progress. There is no use in this engagement happening later in the project, sort of after feed or FID, where our designs are sort of close to finalized, because there's no ability for you to impact on the project at that point in time. So we're trying to put everything together now and in place so that we can deliver this local context, and all of these things that we're doing, such as the foundation stuff that we talked about and the steps that we're doing here, talking to you guys, I think that's what we're really trying to do to deliver that goal for Scotland of this 60% local content. So to present our plan, I've sort of highlighted our project timeline. The final delivery date, as Adrian said, is yet to be determined based on our overall route to market. But if we look at the sort of the next phases of engineering development, it's important to understand that as we move to the right in this timeline, the project is getting further refined. And so our optionality within the project is reducing at each point, but our definition of the project is increasing. So we're able to provide you guys with more detail about what our plans are at each phase. As I said, the project's at this point in time, we're on the concept end, so phase 1 here. So we're exploring our options in a number of areas around foundation, routes to market, other engineering options. I guess at this point we know a floating wind project, 200 megawatts, but we have a large number of options in the way that we could execute that project. So we're coming to you with our high level details of the project and what we think our requirements are now. And in return, we're asking for sort of your high level details of capabilities. And then we will look to sort of assess that. And where we see really high potential, we'll endeavor to collaborate with you, the supply chain, so that we get the most benefit. Other areas where we see good potential, but maybe it's too early in the project to engage, we want those options to remain open to us through the project. So although we might not actively engage, we want to know that as we continue the refinement of our project, that we're not shutting any doors. At this stage, we're relying heavily on the help and advice of supply chain clusters like Deep Wind and organising sessions like today. So we then see the subsequent phases of engagement with the supply chain. These are linked to the milestones in our project, and as we get further refinements, as I said. At these stages, again, we'll have more details, we'll be able to share more information with you, and in turn, you'll likely be able to engage with us on a more focused basis. But we see this forming at least sort of 4 stages of engagement throughout the project, with the final stage being the point in which the project where we can place orders or sort of firm commitments to contracts. So as I said, we're currently in our phase 1 engagement with the supply chain, and we're structuring this with 3 separate RFIs, which I'll talk about. But it's important to state again, this is not the end of the process. This is the start of the process. If we don't engage at this point, either because it's not the right time for us or it's not the right time for you, that certainly does not rule out engagement or opportunities further down the line. But the more we know now, the more we can adapt the project to meet with your capabilities. So as I said, 3 RFIs that we've got this year. The first one is sort of the final piece of our early engagement with the sort of Scottish supply chain of port facilities with respect to foundation assembly and marshalling aspects of the project. As I said, one of the key features of commercial deployment will be the modularity of foundation construction, and this plays pretty well in the Scottish market. So we want to ensure as best we can that this actually happens within Scotland. So therefore, we have engaged entirely with Scottish facilities at this stage of the project and issued this RFI entirely to Scottish facilities. We've held introductory workshops with 8 separate facilities within Scotland, and the RFI has been issued to a subset of these facilities that we believe are most closely aligned with the requirements of our project and of floating wind assembly. In the RFI, we were able to provide sort of preliminary details of the assembly process, initial sizing of the foundation concept through our engagement with the current foundation supplier, our assumptions around the requirements for equipment, our timelines, and the requirements that we likely place on facilities. I'm happy to say we had excellent response from the facilities that we contacted, and we're currently continuing in discussions with a number of those to enable clarifications on both sides and to assess potential opportunities for this collaboration that we want through sort of pre-feed and feed in our project. So second RFI is around fabrication services. So design modularity and the processes that build around this allow for sort of extensive use of distributed manufacture. So we're currently looking to engage with fabrication facilities to manufacture the separate modules of the foundation. And that can be sort of column structures, truss structures, secondary steel, all these aspects that we could fabricate separately at potentially different facilities and then assemble together. What we want to see is the maximum amount of this fabrication being able to place within Scotland and then the wider UK. We want that for future projects as well. Future commercial projects are likely to have a throughput requirement that sort of requires several facilities, and because of the demand, the level of the amount of steel processed there, this is sort of less key at our sort of 200 megawatt scale, but we still have 13 or 14 units that we need to manufacture and get out on reasonable timeframes. So us demonstrating the ability to fabricate across multiple facilities and then successfully assemble rapidly in a Scottish port facility would be a great thing to see for Scotland in future. So we hope to receive a number of responses to this request from both Scottish and UK fabrication yards. And then again, we see we see good potential here for potential collaboration through the project. So a sort of final RFI in this sort of phase, as I said, the phase 1 of our engagement here is more broad than the first two. Sort of the foundation, sort of assembly and fabrication are two big ticket items that it would be nice to see placed within the local supply chain. But we have a number of other scopes and services that we will need to procure and assess throughout the project. So for these aspects of the project, we plan to issue a further RFI detailing a range of project information, some of which we've shared in this presentation today, so that you as the supply chain can measure your engagement with us. We want to tell you what aspects what we believe are the project we need to procure, and we want you to tell us what you can supply and how we should be engaging with you through the process. So some of these things that still need to be assessed are sort of design services, mooring anchors, this list here, cabling, onshore construction, sort of related both to sort of infrastructure and our O&M operations, offshore services, various equipment like cranes, winches, connectors, and many more. So we're currently developing this RFI. We're collating information that we can provide to you at this point in our project, and we plan to issue this document later this summer. With Paul's help, we hope to issue this to all members of the floating offshore wind subgroup of Deep Wind. So please look out for it in the meantime. So finally, highlight ways in which you can get in contact with us. So our primary means of sort of logging supplies is the database that's linked to our website. So you can navigate to the page link highlighted on this slide here and provide us details of what you can offer. Please be as specific as you possibly can about your capabilities and where you think that fits in with our overall project delivery. As I've already highlighted, we'll hopefully be issuing this next RFI through Deepwind, so please do look out across all sources of updates from us. We'll endeavour to keep you updated of how we're progressing. And below you can see there the project email box for specific inquiries. And so we're hoping and I guess expecting for a lot of engagement with you guys over the summer and the rest of the year. So please do bear with us in the process as we try to respond to everyone with the information that you've provided. So yeah, so thank you very much. And I think it's time to pass back over to Paul for a quick Q&A session.
Chris, thanks for that. And Adrian, if you can come back on now, if you've turned your camera and microphone back on, we'll move into the Q&A session. And as you can imagine, we have had a bit of an avalanche of questions. Let's see where we'll start. Here's a simple one, probably to Adrian. Is Subsea 7 partner in all the Simply Blue energy projects? And I think this is referring to your projects in south of Wales and Celtic Sea and in Ireland.
That's an easy question indeed, and the answer is clearly no. Subsea 7 is only a minority shareholder for the Salamander project, and it has nothing to do with the other Simply Blue projects.
Okay, right, that's nice and clear. So we started with an easy one. Here's something that might be a bit harder. What active measures are you taking to engage the experience of the existing oil and gas supply chain to deliver these floating offshore wind projects? Do you see traditional high oil and gas cost base as an obstacle to engagement?
I can take that one, Paul. So I think the first point here is the fact that we have within our partners Subsea 7 and its subsidiary Exodus, both with a strong oil and gas heritage. So obviously that's very useful in terms of understanding how some of the skills can be transferred to renewables. So that's the first thing. The second thing is obviously this project is off Peterhead, but in general we are looking at the Aberdeenshire area, which has a strong heritage of offshore wind, and we are looking to engage with companies from this area for our project. And I think we have already engaged with different ports in different regions in Scotland, and we are engaging currently with some fabricators, and within our RFI process, one of the questions that obviously we need to ask is cost. What we think is that the Scottish supply chain has a lot of experience and is very skilled, but obviously it needs to be competitive as well with other infrastructures. But that's effectively why we want to engage as early as possible to try to understand how we can design and adapt our project to make sure that we can maximize this local content. So that's effectively why we think an early engagement will ensure this in the future.
I would only reiterate that last statement. I think that's why we see huge benefit in this engagement that we're doing now. That for the Scottish supply chain to be successful in the large commercial scale projects coming, it's going to need to be competitive on a commercial basis as well as local. So we want to make use of all the experience there to work out how we can make the Scottish supply chain competitive. And if there's ideas within the supply chain about the way that we can adapt our design so that they can make it cost effectively, that is exactly what we want to see out of this process and what we hope to achieve. So I think by engaging early, we can feed that into our design process. As I said again earlier, if we engage late, there's no ability at that stage when designs are finalized. Once we've got through feed, we've reached FID, the structure is pretty well refined. It's not changing very much at that point. So we engage now, we can really, the supply chain can feel it can make a real difference to this project and this design.
Okay, thanks, Chris. There was a number of questions around the theme of what you said earlier about being able to utilise more ports in Scotland because of the light structure and therefore the water depth. So we've had a number of questions asking what is that water depth range and with what size of turbine on it?
So I'll take that one, Adrian. So I think where you can imagine where we're looking to install, the timelines that we're looking to install, we're very much looking at the next generation of wind turbines. So where we look at larger turbines than are currently being installed in the floating offshore wind projects. So we are looking at for those commercial projects that the ScotWind projects are unlikely to be deploying turbines of 8 megawatts. So we're very much planning for larger turbines. I think in terms of draft and accessibility, there is a range. It's part of the design process. There's trade-offs everywhere in design of these structures, and part of that trade-off is around the requirements to access port facilities and those draft requirements. So I think you can look for different foundation concepts that are on the market to have quite a big range of draft requirements. The foundation that we've selected is towards the bottom end of that. It's probably not got the absolute lowest draft out of some of them on the market, but it is towards the lower end. I think you can see that range probably being somewhere from 6 meters for some concepts all the way up to maybe for semi-submersibles, maybe up to sort of 15 meters plus quayside draft requirements. So it's part of the design process. So it's not a fixed value at this moment, but we know that the design that we have pre-selected is capable of reaching a lot more port facilities than some of the other ones that could be selected. So okay. I can't share specifics about the foundation. Unfortunately, what we can share about the foundation design is what we have shared. There's lots of other information that is covered strictly under non-disclosure agreements. So unfortunately,
okay. So you can as much as you can say, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Chris, another one for you, I think. There was a question around, are you considering condition monitoring systems for your assets? And if so, will these be procured as part of the fabrication package?
It's a good question. I think I think the industry is moving a long way towards this for all projects. It's a bit early in our project to be talking I guess, at that level of detail around what our requirements are for condition monitoring. But I would very much expect that would be yeah, a significant thing for us to look at later. But yes, at this point in time in the project, is important to understand what's out there. We don't want to close off any routes, any doors by going a certain way with the project. But we're dealing at the moment. The project is focused around, I guess, the delivery of the structures and our route to market. Adrian, is there anything else you wanted to add there?
No, I think that's great.
Right. Sorry, I'm just laughing. Some wags got, would that make Osage a Heineken Foundation? Which I think is referring to probably the best foundation in the world. Okay, let's move on. There was a question around the size of the project, 200 megawatts. Is it constrained to that? And can you disclose any more information on where the site is?
So on the second part of the question, again, what we can share at the moment is what is in the presentation, which is 35 kilometers from Peterhead. In terms of what was the other question? The size of the project. So the size of the project is 200 megawatts, and we have effectively done a robust analysis on the different elements that influence the size of the project, the commercial, the economic constraints, and also environmental constraints, and that led us to think that 200 megawatts is the right size for this project. And just coming back to the beginning of the presentation, we are stepping stone pre-commercial project, and we believe that this is the range, the kind of size that is the right one for stepping stones. We're looking at hundreds of megawatts. We are coming from 30 and 50 megawatts, and then we will be going towards gigawatts. So we think something on the hundreds of megawatts scale is definitely the right step towards that bigger than gigawatts future commercial projects.
Okay, another fairly simple one, hopefully. Will the RFI, doesn't say which one, I'm assuming all of them then, be managed by Exodus or by Simply Blue Energy?
Yeah, so for the first two RFIs, they will be absolutely managed. Well, for all of the RFIs, they will be managed by Simply Blue Energy. So that will be my colleague Chris, myself, and my colleagues Bob and Graham as well. So that will be managed from a Simply Blue point of view. On the last one, and this is one for you, Paul, we will look to seek to collaborate as closely as possible with Deep Wind, so that basically we can engage with the right companies.
Okay, that's music to my ears. There we go. And another one on the RFI asking, I'm assuming this refers to the ports one, which is already out. How was it decided which companies would receive the RFI?
Yeah, I'll take
so
it.
You go, Adrian.
Yes, so basically we had already quite a lot of knowledge of the Scottish market, and we basically undertook a high-level assessment of the port facilities, and we decided to engage with the facilities that we thought that they would match our objectives. So it was we did an internal assessment before we went into this RFI. I don't know if you want to add something, Chris.
No, I think just to add, I think obviously where we are on the East Coast, we probably talked to more East Coast port facilities more than we did some others, just because of the practicalities around project delivery. But again, it's important to highlight this is the first phase of our project, and we intend to continue to repeat this exercise that I went through at each stage. So if there's anyone out there that is disappointed that they've not already heard from us, or had opportunity to see the RFI, then please do get in touch with us, and we would be more than happy to engage with them through the process. So if there's anyone out there that is feeling that they haven't had the opportunity, we do not want that. We want to engage with as many people as we can to make sure that we are making the right decisions in the project. So please do reach out. And it's the ship has not sailed. It's probably the right terminology. So please get in touch.
Okay, Chris. In a sort of related supply chain management question, are you looking to use a supply chain management system or company like Achilles, or will this all be handled internally?
I think just coming back to our journey and the 4 phases of engagement for the supply chain, we are currently on an early phase, effectively phase 1, and that is all going to be managed through basically the means that we see on a screen, through our registration page and email. When we get to further phases, and effectively we will have more details that we need to share and more information that we will need to get, that will hopefully be managed by some other platforms. But for the moment, these are the means that we're using.
Okay. And there was a question. I know who this comes from. There's a question around you've looked at the optimization and local supply chain for the substructure, but when it comes to the turbine, did you consider a different type of turbine, say a 2-bladed machine, which would also help lower the costs still further?
I'll take this one. So I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, the whole philosophy behind the Stepping Stone project is to effectively de-risk new technology. So obviously we would be open to basically choosing technology that basically will be available and will be deployed in commercial projects. However, it is very important that we have a project that is financeable, and effectively we have a project that is de-risked. We can't have a project with all the innovations on every single aspect of the project because that is not a project that will be financeable. So at the moment, we have been looking at standard 3-bladed turbines, but if there was certain innovations and that they're in the market, we would be very happy to look at them in the future.
Okay, good. There was a question around, I'm not sure you'll be able to answer this one, given it's more aimed at the Osage technology, but it's a question around, does their foundation require an active ballast system?
Yeah, it's not something that we can answer at this point in time. I think, yeah, as I said, all the information that we're able to share about the foundation design is in the presentation. We have shared more details with some of the supply chain once we've been under NDA with them, but we're not able. It's not our information to make public at this time.
Right. Okay. I'm just looking at this one. Are you confident that fabrication by the Scottish suppliers could be competitive when compared to lower labour costs from Southern Europe and the Far East? Now, of course, the answer to that is of course, but I'll settle for your answers, guys.
Yes, so as we mentioned, the whole philosophy behind this project is to maximize local content since the very early stages of the project. So that's why we are doing all of this now at the pre-FEED stage rather than when we reach detailed design, so we can effectively adapt our project. And as we mentioned earlier, we are trying to understand basically the cost basis very early on, to understand basically how we can work with the Scottish supply chain and to basically get to an acceptable basically cost basis, so that the project can succeed in whatever route to market we decide to go forward with. So I think we are on the same boat, I would say. Yes, getting to the analogy of ships previously, and we are working with the supply chain to understand this very early on and adapt our project for this specific issue.
Okay, and another question around, I think Chris mentioned it during the presentation, but do you see basically disconnecting the substructure from your grid connection from the mooring system to take it back to port for major maintenance operations?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question. It's one of the areas the industry is looking at a lot at the moment. And I think if you look at the projects that are installed at the moment, their methodology is very much for major component replacement. You have to bring it back to port. But there is a lot of interest in innovations around this area. It's clearly a costly and time-consuming activity if you need to do that. But it's difficult to say how we're going to progress as an industry at the moment. We would consider that in circumstances, I think you would almost certainly have to bring it back to port. It's going to be very difficult to do some maintenance activities offshore, but we are very hopeful that the amount of activities that you can do in the offshore environment will increase as sort of innovations and new technologies come to the market. So we are evaluating it as a likely requirement at the moment. But yeah, hopefully innovations in the industry do limit the amount that we would have to do that in future.
Okay, I've got a very specific question here about this company's own technology. I'm trying to widen it out a bit. It's in regard to transition pieces, which the company says they've got a very good solution which lowers the capex and the X cost. Who would they sort of approach about that within the company? I think you could say that about any company that's got something that they would look to lower the overall cost of the project.
Yeah, I think we said here the means by which I think go through the same means by which to contact us here. If you can highlight as much detail as you possibly can about what your technology is and where you see it fits in, whether what scope you think that fits and how it fits into the project, whether that's something that directly comes into the project or whether it's something that is through a fabricator or if it's an innovation that needs to feed into the design process, then please give us as much detail as you can when you contact us, and do contact us through that become a supplier link, and we'll have a look at it, and we'd love to engage with people around the sort of innovative ideas and on how we can reduce the cost of floating wind. This is what everyone's trying to get to bring the cost of energy down. So everything's of interest.
Okay, and one just on biofouling here. Is there interest to engage with scientists in monitoring biofouling and marine growth on the structures?
That's quite a techie one, that one. I think, again, I think we'll look at everything through the project. I'm not going to rule anything out. I've not thought of that at the moment. Is probably the answer.
Okay.
And Adrian, unless you had anything else there.
No, I think just to put that into context, I mean, that's the kind of work that we would probably look at, doing in FEED, and we are, sometime we are not there yet. So that's something that we would definitely look at, but at the moment we haven't looked at that just yet.
Okay. I'm conscious of the time. We're coming up to the top of the hour, and we'll need to wrap up. I'm just going to throw in a comment here from a certain lady that's associated with All Energy. Judith, you're always getting your oar in somewhere. Thank you for a fascinating webinar. I hope the team will make use of Meet the Developer at All Energy. So there you go, Judith, I've given you a plug.
Well, and I'll give it back as well, actually, because we have submitted an abstract for All Energy, so hopefully we will be presenting at All Energy as well.
Right, great stuff. So on that note, I would like to thank Adrian and Chris and Jaya for doing all the stuff in the background, making it all work. And particularly thanks to everyone out there attending the webinar, and thank you for attending. I hope it was interesting. Do keep contacting us, and thank you very much, and hope to see you all at our next webinar. Okay, so bye from us.
Thank you.
Cheers.